Look at this, my mind is pissed and I keep running. Why is this? When I hit it, always is stunning. Always gentle giant, no defiance, all building alliance. And still think that I am peasant, I stuck in the future. But I'm never looking at the fucking present. Keep it up, act like you're all that. Here's a cookie too and some seagulls. You are not my equal, you are.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, you cannot get more authentic than Brian in his own words. You can't get a more accurate assessment than his own self-assessment. If you want to talk about things like motive and psychology, there's nothing better than his own words where he self-diagnoses himself. And so in this episode, we're going to dig deeper into that whole process that we started yesterday, going into the psychology, going into potentially what was the motivating factor here. And how we do that is we start digging deeper into the backstory, right? And so as early as November 6, 2019, almost 13 years before the murders in Idaho, that's a long way back in time, right? 13 years from 28 years old is how far? It's a 15-year-old, right? And so what we see is an account calling itself XR, Those with Visual Snow, posted this chilling self-disclosure. Something major is wrong with me. And there are 117 additional posts that seem to confirm this self-diagnosis. It seems to elaborate on this whole thing. Something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is. I need help. And so if this is really Brian Kohberger, it raises an ominous possibility. Was the seed that led to the slayings in 1122 King Road, was it laid down more than a decade ago? Was that seed laid down in the soil of some distant dysfunction of a young teenager's mind in far-flung Pennsylvania? Did that dysfunction follow him to Idaho? But did it start off brewing and festering, and despite all efforts, infected and finally overcame the mind of the PhD student? In other words, did something in his childhood, something in his adolescence, was that kind of almost a psychological infection that he took with him into college? And so we are going to explore this idea by reviewing those 117 posts to try to get a sense of what we're dealing with. We'll also look into visual snow, which he refers to as VS, in more detail. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Before we do get started, it's always tricky navigating the social media space for content. There are a lot of landmines to be wary of. That's like fake accounts, fake content, things purporting to be what they aren't. But clearly, it's potentially an important space where we reveal, in a sense, another side to who we really are. And it looks like this is what Brian did. We have some also what appears to be confirmation via an email address and other information, sensitive information that I don't want to provide here. But it does appear to be confirmed that this is his online activity. The mainstream media thus far either haven't found these posts yet or are still keeping them at arm's length, perhaps dubious of their credibility. This means we have to be careful. So there's a content warning, just to be careful of what follows in this analysis. So as we venture into Kohberger's alleged posts, I want us to adopt a neutral rather than a judgmental attitude. If we're going to take a position that he's the devil or that he's a monster, we're not really going to make any effort to actually try and understand the mechanism that was actually taking place. How did some kind of psychology overtake him, right? So think about it in the sense that certainly at this time of his life, he was an innocent teenager, and perhaps he made some poor choices. Perhaps he wasn't coping very well with a given situation. And he really does seem terrified about what was happening to him. So terrified that he was repeatedly reaching out for help online on this TapaTalk forum. As early as May 2011, Brian seemed to be trying to stay mentally healthy by eating the right food and by reading books about that. So he says, for example, it's been rough lately. Brian also seemed to experience pushback on the forum on occasion. On this instance, also in May, I think, he's accused of lying about a cure for VS. And you can imagine the people on this forum being quite upset about that. As of August 2022, I think more than 11 years after this was posted, there still is no cure. This remains the case. There's no cure for VS. But the post that we really want to highlight is from May 12th, 2011. Once again, more than 11 years prior to the incident. He wrote, "I always feel as if I am not there, completely depersonalized. Mentally, I experience fog, lack of comprehension at some times. Feel like my life is a movie, depersonalization, depression, no interest in activity, constant thought of suicide, crazy thoughts, delusions of grandeur, anxiety, poor self-image, poor social skills, no emotion, and that is all in all caps. I feel like nothing has a point to it. When I get home, I'm mean to my family. This started when VS did, visual snow. I felt no emotion, and along with the depersonalization, I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. Everyone hates me pretty much. I am an a-hole." Well, there it is in the first words. I always feel as if I'm not there, completely depersonalized. Well, that is a heck of an admission and one hell of a concept. To say that you feel depersonalized is a little like saying you don't feel alive, you don't experience yourself as a person, as an individual. And think about how terrifying that could feel. You're basically a zombie floating through the world, connected to nothing and to no one, feeling nothing, but also horribly aware of that. It's almost like climbing Mount Everest, but you can't feel your feet, you can't feel your fingers. You are basically the walking dead. And is there really any point to your journey? Is there any point to going up or down this way or that way? Right? And he is horribly aware of that, and also that this numbness can't be good. So no wonder he's worried that something's wrong with him, something major is wrong with him. So at this early stage, we've only examined a couple of posts. There's still over 100 to go. I think one can ask, what is going wrong here? And I think we've got to consider the possibility that he was already using heroin at this point. Contextually, we know that it is certainly possible. Is it probable? His pizza pal referred to a period 13 years ago in a recent interview where they delivered drugs to Brian, and Brian was an addict for 4 years. And that was, I think, to some extent during the end of his high school, and I guess, that sort of period. So this may be in that ballpark. So that is something we also want clarity in. When exactly was that 4-year period when he was on substances? And then is this related to that? It seems like it is, doesn't it? Because detachment is a common symptom of heroin use. In fact, some people will take the drug in order to soothe that feeling of that sort of very sharp, the sharp edges of reality, that they want that to be soothed and sort of numbed. But if it is over-soothed, over-numbed, you become detached. You can imagine excessive heroin use turning into the excess form of detachment, which is depersonalization. You are so numb, you no longer feel alive. You are no longer connected to your world. Well, obviously, that was the point of taking these substances. So according to one site, the desired effects, and this is the effects people are chasing when they take heroin, include detachment from physical and emotional pain and a feeling of well-being. So I suppose you could ask the question, how self-aware could an addict be? I'm doing this, I want to feel this, but I don't understand that feeling. Where's that coming from? Well, I'll take some more drugs, maybe that'll help. So you could have another egg or chicken scenario in terms of the psychology. Did Brian develop depersonalization, also known as derealization, because he used drugs, or did he take drugs because of those feelings? Or was it eventually a vicious cycle feeding on itself, feeling empty, taking drugs, feeling emptier, taking drugs, and so on? Now, interestingly, all of these self-diagnosed symptoms fall within the parameters we originally set: an isolated, unhappy, emasculated, anxious individual with low self-esteem, bordering on self-loathing. And there's also sort of a self-destructive thing going on there, right? This is not us assessing him. This is his self-assessment. He even acknowledges poor social skills as well as delusions of grandeur. He's aware of it. He thinks about death a lot, and he suffers from meaninglessness. And then ultimately takes the psychology. This is the weird part. This is the scary part. He takes all of this psychology into criminology. Is that really a good place to exercise these demons? He says, I am mean to my family. I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. But the fact that he is acknowledging this here in a public forum at least means on some dim level he is aware that there's something wrong with him and it bothers him. I don't know if this is the best place to reach for help, but he clearly is trying to fix himself. Did he succeed? So one can see here the foundational psychology for the idea that perhaps he was born a criminal, that there was something wrong with him all along, and that gets reinforced by people around him calling him a creep and a weirdo and stay away from me. Well, you know what? You are criminal, you were criminal, and you always will be. Right? That's psychology. And thus, in order to calm the demons, to quieten the screaming of the lambs, maybe he feels he must just simply give in to his dark fate. He must become who he is, who he was all along. It's his destiny, just as Dharma thought it was. Of course, if you dance with the devil, if you chase dragons for any length of time, don't expect to come out of it without getting burned. Brian appears to have gotten burned and then seemed to awaken and say, hey, how did this happen? Right? He's disconnected to his own actions. He doesn't see the cause and effect. And it's because he's thinking, if it wasn't so fragmented, he may have seen a link between the cause and effect. And I kind of dealt with that in yesterday's live where I was saying, well, if you are feeling miserable because of what you're focusing on, focus on something else. But if you can't see that cause and effect, if you can't rise above the trees and forests of that psychology, well, then you're lost in it. And you can clearly see that he was. So this wasn't some sort of demon possession, something that was unfathomable. It was simply the natural side effect that comes from little lost boys who don't know who they are, playing with fire. So I'm not going to take it further than that right here, but we are going to slowly, step by step, go through the rest of those 100 and something posts and get a deeper sense of Kohberger in his own words. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.